So joining me to present our next award is Dr. Marie Henselder-Kimmel. Marie is a doctor who specializes in obstetrics and gynecology and lives in New Jersey, where she has been a star American Promise chapter leader for several years. And I want to say that whenever I started with American Promise, she welcomed me so warmly, and I'm forever grateful for that. At our core, we at American Promise believe that every person aspires to freedom, seeks to serve and live in a prosperous and well-functioning community and nation, and that our different political affiliations or candidates are far less important than our commitment to our shared values of freedom, equality, and responsible self-government. So recently, we connected with a leader and an organization that we believe shares these values and disciplined, nonpartisan approach to empowering Americans to be strong citizens in our republic. And I will let Dr. Henselder-Kimmel.
Thank you. In the midst of a dangerous pandemic, alongside the social and political crisis that divided and harmed so many Americans over the past several years, Aliya, Bhatia and Vote ER stepped up to help serve and unite so many Americans. Vote ER believes that empowered voices and participation in the democratic process lead to positive health outcomes. Vote ER is a nonpartisan organization and network that connects healthcare institutions and providers with the tools, training, and community to register colleagues and patients to vote, bringing providers and patients together to promote civic engagement and create healthier communities across the United States. Vote ER views hospitals and community health clinics as central touch points in communities, much like schools, DMVs, and libraries, where citizens should consider their civic health as well as their physical and mental health. Aliya Bhatia is the executive director at Vote ER. She was drawn to the connection between health and democracy through the combination of being raised by parents in the medical field and various defining experiences while studying, teaching, and working on housing and health initiatives. She earned her master's in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School and is a graduate of the School of Foreign Services at Georgetown University. She started her career as a high school educator and then as a strategy consultant at the Boston Consulting Group. Aliya is a Georgia native and has worked in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Missouri. We look forward to working with Vote ER and its strong network of healthcare and social work professionals to advance our nation's civic health and the 4-Hour Freedom Amendment. We're proud to present this Citizen Leadership Award to Aliya Bhatia and Vote ER. Aliya, can you come up and join us? She's just going to jump right up there.
Thank you, Dr. Jessica, Dr. Marie, Jeff, the American Promise team, this entire group of people here. It is an honor to accept this award on behalf of Vote ER and to build community with some incredible leaders in this room. Vote ER is a little new to this American Promise family, and I'd love to do something interactive to kind of kick us off to share a little bit about the work that we do. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if a statement applies to you. And if it does, please keep your hand raised. Raise your hand if you know someone who was surprised by the cost of insulin for themselves or for a loved one. Keep your hands raised. Raise your hand if the opioid epidemic has impacted you or someone you care about. Keep your hands raised. Raise your hand if you know someone impacted by gun violence, or if you are a healthcare professional who has treated a gunshot wound. And lastly, please raise your hand if you've ever been surprised by what was on a medical bill or on your health insurance bill. I think that's all of us. You can put your hands down. My name is Aliya Bhatia, and I'm the executive director of an organization called Vote ER. After leading projects in many corners of social policy, I came to this work after shadowing a paramedic for a day in Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm from, in 2019. That day, we exchanged personal stories as we drove out to meet a team of EMTs supporting patients in the community. From the beginning, we knew we had grown up in different communities, came from different generations, and had different politics. After watching his team respond to so many social challenges, homelessness, changes in health insurance, food insecurity, and more, I became overwhelmed by what these EMTs were being asked to do without the proper resources. So I asked the paramedic, my guide, what he would do if he could only change one thing. If he had a magic wand, he could wave once, but then it would disappear. And his answer surprised me. He said, Aliya, if I could only change one thing, I wish all my patients would vote. He explained that if all of his patients voted, that locally elected leaders would put resources into affordable housing, into jobs training, and making sure there was a grocery store in every neighborhood. And he said that if all of his patients voted, his department would have enough resources to get an ambulance to every emergency in time. In January 2020, when I found out that an organization called Vote ER was doing something about this exact problem, I jumped on board. We created tools and resources for health professionals to help their patients vote. 2 months after I started my job, the COVID pandemic struck. Departments of motor vehicles, where we are traditionally asked about voter registration, shut down. But pediatricians rose to the call, with doctors like Margaret Sager asking each of their 18-year-olds if they were registered to vote, and helping them grow not just physically, but in their agency to make a difference in their country. The fear of long lines at the polls put immunocompromised Americans and their family members in an awful dilemma. Do they go to the polls to ensure their voice is heard and to ensure that they can give input into the design of policies impacting their health and the health of their loved ones? Or do they stay safe by staying home? But our healers rose to the call, with social workers, nurses, and doctors across the country using Vote ER tools to support their patients with vote-at-home options so they could safely request and return their mail-in ballots. These health professionals were seeing the same thing as that paramedic in Atlanta saw, that our health and our vote and our democracy are linked. They viscerally experience what is at stake on their every shift, and why it is essential that our most marginalized patients have a voice in our democracy. We know how 2020 ended. Vote ER, along with thousands of organizations like yours, and millions of Americans worked to ensure that we turned out to vote. And despite the barriers to casting a ballot in 2020, a record number of Americans voted in the presidential election. But today we find ourselves in an uncomfortable reality, indicated by everybody who raised their hand at the beginning of this presentation, which is that despite that record turnout, we still face a myriad of health issues, which in the grand scheme of things have relatively simple policy cures. We face an opioid epidemic, uncontrolled insulin costs, and the bloody consequences of being a country that loses more children to gun violence than to any other cause. And the Americans experiencing the resulting overdoses, seizures, and gunshot wounds show up in the same emergency rooms, the same ambulances that are now short-staffed following a multi-year pandemic. I remember that ambulance ride-along from 2019. I asked the paramedic an impossible question, the one thing that he would do with his magic wand. In his response that he wished all his patients voted, there was an implicit belief that those votes would be enough to shape the actions of our elected leaders. And while we can't take for granted, we can never take for granted, that the act of voting in America does make an undeniable mark in choosing who wins and influencing their decisions, we have a long way to go to contend with some of the other forces at play. I know everyone in this room is deeply passionate about at least one of those forces, the role of money in politics. Right now, big multinational corporations can summon our elected representatives whenever they want to, voting not with a ballot, but with their cash, and skewing our health policies to support their profits instead of our well-being. And every single one of us, every one of us who raised our hand at the beginning, we are all losing as a result. We want our democracy to be one where the definitive act of an American's vote shapes the outcomes of policies for the terms of their elected representatives. Right now, we do not have that certainty, that simplicity, or that efficiency in our democracy. But we can get there with both the short-term decisions of the next month and a half ahead of us before the upcoming election and the urgent need for reform in the 2 decades beyond November. We can build a diverse, healthy, and prosperous democracy, one that can set a venerated precedent for freedom across the globe, as Manu said. We can get there the same way that 22 states already have in calling on Congress to pass the For Our Freedom Amendment. The way that you in this room have helped to accomplish that, community by community and state by state. We can get there the same way that women got the right to vote during the disruptions, by the way, of the 1918 influenza pandemic, which resulted in an increase in public health spending and improvements in child well-being. And we can get there the same way that we got to record turnout during COVID, by working together across so many different perspectives and professions, just like we have in this room, and by ensuring that those most proximate to our nation's challenges are at the front line of reform. Together, we can get to that vision of healthy communities powered by an inclusive democracy, and Vote ER in our community of healers, from recovery specialists to pediatricians to school nurses and more. We are honored to be part of this incredible community, ensuring that every voice is heard and that every vote shapes our nation. Thank you.